With that, let's go ahead and get started. Again, everyone, thank you so much for hopping on and joining us this afternoon for Threadx's live Q&A with our experts alongside Corey Ball, the author of Hacking APIs. We're together today because we can't emphasize enough the importance of bringing the community together to talk about shared challenges and learnings in the industry. So with that, if any questions come to mind throughout the presentation, we want this to be as interactive as possible. We've scheduled a majority of today's session to answer your questions. So please be sure to post them in the live Q&A. And if anybody's interested, we'll be sure to take you on mute so you can ask Corey or Neil or both together yourself. So with that, I'll turn it over to yourself, Neil and Corey, to get this started.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sid. Yeah, really happy everyone's here, and I'll do my best here to monitor both the chat and the Q&A so that we can kind of keep the conversation flowing. But while we wait for some of those to roll in here, I'll kind of kick us off with just a general question for you here, Corey. I don't know, what was kind of like the provenance or what led up, like the straw that broke the camel's back that led you to write, API hacking book here?
Yeah, back in December 2019, I was a penetration testing consultant with Moss Adams, primarily focusing on web apps and network pen testing. And at the time, a partner over there, Kevin Villanueva, approached me and said, "Hey, you're the web app pen tester. We're getting a lot of demand for API related pen tests. Can you, become the SME on that?" And I dove into it like I would any other topic. And first thing I did was went on Amazon and searched for the book on the topic. I typed in hacking APIs and there was nothing there. So I continued to research, went to a few conferences, asked all the expert pen testers that were giving the keynotes and that sort of thing, what do you do for API pen tests? And they either didn't know or they would have someone dedicated on their team that was like the one person that did it. So I conducted my own research, put together about 150 pages of notes and decided, I'm halfway to writing a book already. I wonder if a few publishers would be interested. And so I pursued No Starch and Wiley from there. And 2 years later, I wrote the book. It came out.
It's an interesting point that you brought up, like the kind of different roles, different people kind of focusing either on like web application or like APIs for, generally. Do you think of those two separately still in the industry, or do you think that, over time we're going to conflate those skill sets, or kind of think how, that'll go in the long term?
Yeah, I think with the quantity of APIs out there and API requests taking up about 83% of all web traffic, that naturally you're likely to use the web application through a browser first, discover an API is there, and then begin attacking it. And there are different tools and techniques that you can leverage to attack APIs versus web apps generically. And so I do think it's definitely a different skill set and overall pretty much a different test. And so I do think of those differently. But a lot of the issues you can categorize the findings. There's some shared vulnerabilities between the OWASP top 10, which applies to web apps generically, and then the API security top 10. You're still seeing authentication issues, security misconfigurations, authorization issues, those sorts of things.
Cool. Yeah, we have definitely found many ways to recreate lots of the same vulnerabilities. And, it does take different skill sets and different ways to exploit them on, different attack surfaces. So I think that this is a good way to kind of, help people understand those two differences and, pull them apart a little bit.
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest differences is web applications, you're going to interact with a web browser, you're going to see that graphical interface. And if you're only focusing on that, you may miss the API requests that are running in the background that are populating the web pages.
Yeah, a lot of times when I'm doing like the defensive side or just kind of pulling apart things for attacking penetration testing, I think that a lot of people don't recognize that even like your front end is using the API to connect with the back end, and so we can look at a lot of those things are very rigid in terms of the expectations that we write them as developers. So we'll say like, oh, A and B should always look like this, but we never do, or typically don't always do the checks necessary to ensure that, what we're expecting is what we're giving. Did you have any, do we have any other questions yet? Or do you have any to follow up on here, Sid?
Oh, we actually just got one in the chat. David asked, we know how to address OWASP API security top 10. The unknown unknowns concern me the most. Completely hear that as a trend in cyber in general, but specifically, how can one guard against a dedicated hack attempt that exploits API designs?
Well, I think a good first approach, and I don't, when you're saying you know how to test for the OWASP API security top 10, I'm not sure which perspective that's from, if it's a blue team or other, but even if you know that, that other side of it, I think is very important, which is you've set up the defenses, you're logging, you're analyzing traffic and watching for things. The other side of it is the adversarial perspective. So attacking the API as an adversary, as a penetration tester, opening it up to bug bounty, those sorts of things are going to give you that new perspective that even though you may be defending and monitoring it and you have a lot in place there, you do want to make sure that you are having someone attack it from an adversary's perspective. That way you have that validation that your security controls are in fact working. Because if other presentations I've given and other research I've done shows that generic vulnerability scans, if they're not catered to API specifically, if you're just running, maybe a generic Zap scan or Burp Suite or any of those tools, if you're just running it generically against your web app and it's not configured specifically for APIs, those come back with false negatives, giving you that false sense of security that things are okay when they're actually not. So you do want to make sure those sorts of scans are configured to work specifically with APIs. You're doing authorization testing, setting up an account as user A, and then attempting to access user A's resource as user B, something like that to make sure that authorization's in place, testing out functionality from one user to another. And yeah, that adversary perspective, whether it's from a penetration tester, a bug bounty hunter, or something like that, is going to add a lot of value to ensure that you have that extra layer of security, you have that extra layer of assurance that things are secure.
And David, if you'd like to add any color, we just permitted you access to talk if you'd like to come off mute.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the answer. We actually have held like an internal security hackathon where we do turn each other on our APIs to try to attack them and things. Broadly speaking, though, it's kind of like trying to understand how APIs are designed to prevent security attacks, but also just understanding if someone is dedicated and they start looking at the API design itself and trying to attack it by exploiting the design of the API itself, rather than generic things like authentication things, but looking for where the APIs perhaps reveal too much information to different users. I'm mostly concerned about how does the industry keep track of what APIs have been exploited, what are the root causes for those, and how do we share that knowledge across the industry so that as we design APIs and design the infrastructure, that we're addressing those new and emerging attack vectors.
Yeah, with API specifically, at least historically, one of the major issues I see on the testing side of things was a lack of knowledge on how to thoroughly test APIs for security vulnerabilities. So you have the release of the OWASP API security project, December 2019. So even with that, it doesn't necessarily prescribe exactly how to test in all scenarios for a variety of APIs. That was one of the things that helped fuel me writing hacking APIs was delivering those tools and techniques out to the community. So applying those tools and techniques that can help inside an internal hackathon, definitely value there. I do think getting an independent third party can help. When I don't know, there can be issues when maybe the people that develop certain features could be blinded by, using a feature as an adversary would. And so the getting that third-party perspective can really help thoroughly test an API for those sorts of weaknesses, looking at business logic flaws and using features as exploits, or testing the API thoroughly and getting back additional information that maybe the team wouldn't see as a potential weakness, but an attacker could combine with several other findings into a more complex attack.
One of the things I'll add on there is, as we're coming up with, those particular things that, a third party or an adversary is going to attack, when we're coming through with feature requests or use cases in the development of like APIs, and this is kind of true for just about any like software development SDLC, it's like we should also try to come up with abuse cases too. Like, what are the actual worst case scenarios if somebody was to use this for nefarious or undesired intent, so that we can then test for those or build those in from the beginning of the security product or of the product security itself. So we can have that hardening across the whole SDLC. And then if we know those abuse cases or those things that we would kind of model for at the beginning, we can also test for those later using some of the techniques that Corey was talking about.
And then in the end, I mean, the best approach is very similar to any other form of security, whether it's network security or anything like that, which is a layered approach is the best way to go. Don't depend on a single security control. Don't depend on a single WAF. Have the layers in place, have monitoring and logging in place to be able to review that and, see if you are being attacked, see if anyone is being successful.
Awesome. Thank you, David, so much for the question. But we have questions rolling in pretty consistently now. So the next one that really pops up is from Ben, and Ben mentioned, was there anything surprising or in particular that caught you off guard when you did deeper API research? And Ben, I'll give you permission to add any color as you see fit now. Or I guess, Corey, I think that question's targeted for you.
Yeah, I can ask that. I wasn't sure if Ben would have more to add, but I think it shouldn't have caught me off guard. But the thing that did was vulnerabilities like SQL injection that have been, SQL injection's been around for over 20 years now as far as a published weakness. And to see that ported over to a newer technology, with APIs picking up around web APIs, specifically REST, picking up around 2014. And to see, the old vulnerabilities didn't go away. They're still plaguing the newer technologies. And it shouldn't have caught me off guard, but that was one of the surprising things, was there are many of those. The second part is, I still can't wrap my head around it, but maybe it's because APIs aren't graphical. So maybe there's some thought behind, this is machine-to-machine communication. Attackers aren't going to interact with it. So seeing the great lack of authorization security controls across the board, with that being the number one on the OS API security top 10 list, and seeing it in person where those vulnerabilities are all over the place, and seeing that, it's pretty mind-blowing. Authorization, when we're talking about a fintech API or something else, it's literally the ability to see into someone else's bank account, the ability to the functions don't have authorization checks, the ability to transfer that money. Those sorts of things are pretty surprising to see.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben, so much for the question. We really appreciate you posting it. Next, just off the top of the heap, Carlton asked, how effective is API scanning to identify the holes? And Carlton, I'll be sure to share the mic if you'd like to come off mute as well.
Hi. No, it's really a general question where, how I try to explain, I'm part of risk management, and we have questionnaires and software security, questions that should relate to API security, and the fact that API being simply another piece of code that may not always have attention. What kind of vulnerabilities, how effective is scanning, and what are the kinds of smart questions we can ask our developers in using APIs, either as an entry point into a cloud environment or as an integration point between two critical systems. So that was the nature of the question.
Okay. Well, I can kind of kick us off there, perhaps a little bit on like kind of perhaps the first part there on, scanning in general can really help you get a good breadth of all of your applications, or like it's like a particular scope that we're setting off, but it's not going to give you a good depth, right? So, it's going to help us identify areas of interest where perhaps we need to do, other things like code review or manual penetration testing, or dive a little deeper into, the abuse cases that we talked about earlier. So we're going to have like a really good idea so that we don't miss particular like corners of the application, we might say, shine the light in all the areas, but it's not going to give you like a full conclusive hey, I am secure. You can kind of think of it more along the lines of like a badnessometer, like how many bad things did I find? It's not going to tell you how good it is or how good something stacked up.
Yeah, and from my perspective as a penetration tester, the scanning tools that may come to mind, you could perform code analysis to find things. You could perform OSINT to find exposed credentials, anything, exposed API keys on GitHub, that sort of thing. But once it gets into scanning the actual APIs, if you're using tools generically, Zap, Nessus Pro, even Burp Suite, if it's just set to scan it without any additional configuration, you're going to get a lot of false negatives, and you're going to mainly only get API 7, the security misconfiguration vulnerability. Those scanners are decent at picking up those vulnerabilities, but they have an issue with the rest. And the problem is because with web APIs, you're authenticating to it, and then you're getting a token, and then all of the other API requests that are protected require that authorization token. So if you're using a generic tool without additional configuration, then it's going to scan those as an unauthorized, unauthenticated user, and you're going to get the results back based on that information. And so if you are thinking of Zap or Burp Suite or something like that, then making sure to use the manual process with Zap, where you're crawling through the web application as an authenticated user with an authorization token, those can help improve the results of those scans. Same with Burp Suite.
Cool. Kind of curious your thoughts on this, Corey. So like sometimes when I've been, trying to, use a scanner like Zap or Burp to do API kind of like discovery or fuzzing, I'll pump it through like Postman or like SOAP UI first. What are your thoughts on kind of like using them in tandem?
Yeah, ideally, I like to go the other way around. So if a target organization has defined their API and they have documentation or a Swagger file, then I like to put that into Postman so that I have my whole attack surface, or at least what the client thinks is the whole attack surface, into there. And then pivot over to Burp Suite to perform additional scans and crawling to see if anything else comes up, and then to perform the testing from there.
Exactly. Like I'll use it to like, target particular areas in the request. So that's a, kind of what I'm trying to ask is like, is that a better way? Is it more valid? Are we getting closer to like closer to that 100%, but probably not there yet?
I think that is a decent way of going about it. Also using tools like Kite Runner to help scan the API. That's a directory brute force request that's built for API specifically. So that can help if there are any, it's called like zombie APIs. So maybe APIs that were in the past supported, but were never officially decommissioned, and they're still hanging about, even though they may not be a part of the specification. But making sure to test for those improper assets management vulnerabilities, and looking across the API for those. The difference for me, I like to use Postman, one, to visualize my entire scope, so I have the full collection with all the requests and endpoints in it. I also like to use the variables in Postman to test. I call it fuzzing wide versus fuzzing deep. So if I can use the collection runner to test across the entire collection of requests and test out an API for specific vulnerabilities. Whereas with Burp, I can really dig deep into specific requests and replacing the attack position to target specific user input.
Cool. No, those are good pro tips.
Fuzzing wide versus fuzzing deep. I'm gonna have to put those in our back pocket, save them for another day. It's awesome. Corey, quick question on my side. I know you joined us at Black Hat this year and your presence was awesome. I'm curious, just pick your brain. It seems like every single conference has its own themes or like the big trends of what's resonating in the industry today. What did you hear commonly when you attended Black Hat and DEF CON? I guess, what did you get asked about the most?
I got asked mostly about API security vulnerabilities. So like, what's the top thing that if an organization has an API, what should they be looking for? Maybe from other pen testers, where are some good resources to up their skills on the API side? Which vulnerability should they be testing for? Which scanners should they be using? That sort of thing.
All right, well, I'll tee you up for this one. Where should I go to practice and learn how to attack APIs?
So I just helped develop, create and release the APISec University. So it's an API security university. And the first course we are releasing is the APISec Certified Expert. And so it's a free resource for anyone that's interested in learning how to hack APIs. We have a whole bunch of different modules with videos that guide users through actively testing for API security vulnerabilities. And it's at apisecu.com.
A question that came through the chat, which Neil, I think I can toss this one over more onto your side. This came from a video, which he said, how can Threadx help optimize and rationalize the security stack in the cloud while minimizing functional overlap and ensuring compliance and performance?
All right, well, that's a mouthful. In general, I mean, it's good to keep in mind that, kind of some of the things that we've said earlier, there is no one solution for everything. So we are merely one piece of a puzzle. And, we can be a best fit for some organizations. When it all comes down to it, we are, a next generation WAF, our web application and API protection tool. We will parse all of your HTTP traffic inline and look for things that are indicative of an attack. And effectively, as we find things that are indicative of an attack, we're going to raise some risk score. When you reach a certain risk threshold, we're going to say like, hey, you can't visit this place anymore or interact with this entity origin application server. So that works really well for web applications. And kind of one of the things we said earlier in regards to APIs, since we have like a expectation, since it's machine to machine interaction, that this will be very rigid, we can use kind of schemas and kind of like the Swagger files to define what those would look like. And so anything outside of that schema, we can raise that risk score quicker and say like, this is definitely something that's either like a misconfiguration or somebody doing something nefarious. So that's kind of where we sit in terms of like our capabilities. Where we can make that part of like a larger ecosystem is maybe you would take that, using some of like our log emitter functionality and build that into a larger like SIEM situation so that you can have that part of like a bigger picture. A lot of times when I'm working with our customers, I try to tell them that, one of my areas that I try to work with you on is provide you enough time so that if there is an attack, a new 0-day, or a vulnerability that's in your application, I can mitigate attacks that would exploit that vulnerability while you put in the full remediation guidance or actually fix the code. So that's kind of, again, like you want to make sure that you fix the actual vulnerability, but you also want to make sure that you have something to protect you when, something new is discovered. So.
Awesome. Kind of like repairing the ship while also having a lifeboat on the side to save you just in case.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect. Awesome. Thanks for the explanation, Neil. Next question, Corey. We've talked about the recent conferences, we've talked about your book, and also the live course that you have. So we're curious, what's up next on your plate?
Yeah, so I actually signed on with No Starch Press for book number 2. And yeah, my main focus there is looking at Web3. Of course, APIs are a part of Web3. So looking at those, it's a pretty big topic. So looking at, the whole scope of vulnerabilities and how to thoroughly test those weaknesses.
Awesome. We'll definitely be keeping an eye out for that. That's super exciting to hear what's coming up next. Let's see, I think I saw that we had a hand raised. Awesome. Well, we have just a few moments left with Corey for the live Q&A. Any last questions from the audience that we'd like to make sure we get covered today? Feel free to post them in the live Q&A, and we'll definitely make sure to touch on them before we wrap up today. I guess one of the last questions that I think we could probably cover is, APIs, we've talked about them being one of the biggest vectors and targets in modern attacks. Do you think it's going to stay focused on APIs? I guess, what do you think the next wave of techniques is going to be seen from the hacker perspective?
Yeah, web APIs are going to stick around for a while. There'll definitely be more competition between REST APIs and GraphQL APIs. And I recently was a technical editor on Black Hat GraphQL. So there's another API hacking book that's coming out in the near future with No Starch and full of amazing content. So definitely check that out. But yeah, as far as the current state of things, I think with the Great Resignation that went on last year, and maybe is still slightly continuing to go on, and 60% of developers considering new career paths. Improper assets management is definitely going to be more of a focus. If there were developers that an organization depended on for either their API altogether, development, security, so on and so forth, or even a portion of it. If that developer is no longer there and the maybe the portion of it that they were managing is undocumented, then that's going to cause a lot of issues down the road.
Awesome. Definitely appreciate kind of the seeing through the looking glass.
So true. I can empathize with that so much.
Awesome. I think we have time for about one more question. Kenny Cannon, I just gave you access to ask if you would so like to.
Yeah. Hey, hello, good afternoon or good morning. I don't know where you're broadcasting from, but here at my company, we have a large footprint of API gateway. We're deploying WAFs. We deploy WAFs in front of the API gateway. Outside of the OSWA, default rule set that we apply to those WAFs, would you recommend any other kind of default rules to protect our API gateways?
Well, what are your default rules doing? I think that's probably the best place to start, right? In the sense of if you're looking more for enhancement in that area.
Yeah, it's it's just the OSWA top 10.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, definitely. Do you mean the OWASP top 10, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I mean, there are definitely other things that you kind of want to take, into the context of your application as well. You might think about, the OWASP top 10 is going to help you identify things like broken authentication, but you might want to consider maybe somebody's going to just go and try to do like a brute force or credential stuffing attack on your login page. So in that sense there, what does that look like in terms of normal, people logging in there with, failed attempts and actual attempts versus, something that would be like a credential stuffing bot. So how can we kind of look at those and maybe put into place particular rules that take into account maybe the flow? Maybe every user should go A, B, C, and C is your login page. In that case there, can we enforce that flow and then ensure that anybody who goes directly to the login page and just tries to log in, they're likely, you know, incurring some sort of risk value. And then over time, we can identify if those are actual nefarious entities or not. That's one of the areas that I try to focus in on first, because that's, you know, when somebody gets authenticated into the application, you're usually opening up many more possibilities for exploit.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, everybody, we're just about at that time. And of course, we want to be respectful of everybody's schedules. So we want to thank Corey, Neil, thank you so much again for taking the time out of your day to join us. This has been awesome. So again, thank you does not go far enough.
Great to be on with you guys. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no, thanks for hanging out, Corey. I always glad to chat with you.
The last thing that I'll share is, before we part ways, is that we are having another AppSec expert join us in about a month. Tanya Jenkins from We Hack Purple and Bright Securities and Beyond with us. So again, if you enjoyed today's session with Corey, make sure to keep your eyes out or mark your calendars for September 14th, as she'll be joining us for a very similar session. Thank you all again for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your Thursday.